So our first panel of the day, for me, panels are like competing with TikTok because you have to be fast and keep talking. So we're going to skip introductions.
Love that.
And jump right into the topic. Business intelligence is a loaded word. So, Michael, can you set the stage for our conversation, if you will?
Yeah, so like you said, it's a very loaded word, right? Business intelligence. And I think from a business intelligence perspective, one of the things that we're really looking at is from, within messaging, how is the community actually performing, right? And how does that comply with everybody's business, right? You want to be sensitive to everybody's business. So when you talk about business for the M&Os, business for, how it affects their consumers, business for the senders, how does that affect their deliverability, and then how you actually tie that back into an ecosystem where everybody communicates the performance of the business, if you will, right? So, when it comes to, I think there's a lot of changes that are coming in the near future, and actually very excited to see some of these changes and some of the interactions within the ecosystem itself.
And you mentioned businesses, and I think Caitlin, as the person, as the voice of the customer, and as the only DCA on stage, walk us through a day in the life of your customer and then how that impacts your work day.
A day in the life of our customer in this ecosystem and industry is fraught in some days. The volume and velocity of change is very, it's a heavy burden upon our customers and in some cases their customers. And so it's just, a continuous education is a big piece, which I know that some of my CSP, sort of fellow CSPs, as well as DCAs will echo, like the burden of continuous education, it's a daily burden. It's something that we have to stay on top of because everything that we're gonna talk about on stage, even some things that we may disagree on or are sort of actively figuring out on this room, we have to think about the fact that it takes, there's the trickle-down effect of the ecosystem, where it's like we sit here, and then then you have a DCA, and then where there's sometimes a CSP, and then there may be an additional before you even get to the actual enterprise themselves. And then that enterprise still has to communicate that to sort of their own internal users, business, power admins, what have you. And so I don't feel like I can overstate the importance of sort of the empathy for the enterprise in this ecosystem and our burden as just a collective industry to assist each other as well as our customers on just how to stay on top of that continuous education, which a lot of the insights that you just spoke about, we can trickle that down to the enterprise to help them be more effective with just monitoring their channels.
That's a great point, and I think Ruth's in her, she had the statistic, but we're 91% all in on AI and our customers at 50%.
Yeah.
I think that statistic is across the board, across everything that we try and do is they don't share our enthusiasm for all the stuff that they're doing because they have different pain points that they want to solve.
Well, and it's just one more thing, right? So Ruth was talking about this. It's all the enterprises want to do all the things, but we're just on stage talking about these messaging channels, and we'll get into WhatsApp and RCS later on, but add voice into the mix, and then add sort of computer-generated voice and also text into the mix, and that's like almost an entire different modality. So it's fraught.
It is fraught. Speaking of voice in the future and RCS, Simeon, as our foreign voice on panel, give a global perspective as where you see the technology landscape evolving the next 12, 14 years.
Yeah.
Months, sorry.
I was going to say 24 years is a stretch, but I mean, certainly, I think it's really interesting now. I mean, if we take a step back and look at it from, let's say, a brand perspective, they already have a choice of channels. They have a choice of, do I use text messaging? Do I use voice? They've always had access to things like MMS,
right.
Pricing aside. And I think, now that we're starting to see things like RCS come to the forefront, but, there are the other channels like WhatsApp. And I think, just even last week, we've seen changes on those channels occur that point the direction to the way that things are happening. So, I mean, WhatsApp have announced the change in pricing of marketing price go up, utility notifications come down. And I think really the view of that was it's really been driven by a saturation of spam on the marketing channel. It's really hard to template a marketing message. Everything else, a little easier, but marketing promotion, the content can vary so much. And WhatsApp as an ecosystem is almost the nirvana. It's a single vendor, entirely end-to-end control. They don't have to get a huge amount of buy-in from carriers, providers, etc. So what they say goes. And the fact that they've already needed to change their marketing price points show that they've not been able to control and manage spam or unwanted aggressive communications. So, to come back to your question, TJ, I see that even in that simple environment, they've not been able to solve the problem. They're able to take steps towards it, but I see those same sort of issues start to come through the rich media channels of RCS. We see the same processes of registration, templating, know your customer, come in play, and even those are not fully sufficient. So I would say everything that we're doing today, we will have to keep doing. There's nothing that's going to be a silver bullet and solve that, and we will have to do more and more and more. So yes, back to your point, I think, Caitlin, of our customers having a long list of things they need to do. That list is just going to keep growing, unfortunately, rather than simplifying.
Right.
And that brings me, I know you were shaking your head a little bit, but Aegis has a long history of vetting. And I do want to talk about RCS and WhatsApp because I feel they will have the challenges of scale that SMS and MMS have already solved. And there are a lot of lessons to, and the people who solve those problems are the best ones to solve the new problems that show up. But before we go into that, John, Aegis has a long history of vetting. Not everyone kind of knows about it, all that you do. Set us a stage for the next topic we want to talk about.
Okay, well, some of my friends out there tell you, vetting doesn't stop fraud by itself, but it is the first step to stopping fraud. So the idea of knowing who is on the network, who's on the platform, sending messages to the consumers is the first line of defense. But the second line of defense is knowing what are they running on your platform. The third is to ensure that once they go live into market, monitoring to ensure that they don't change that campaign that's running on the platform. And then lastly, really collecting the results of the business. So complaint data, transaction data, counts at the program, at the campaign level, complaints at the campaign level, and the ability to identify anomalous transactions that would indicate something's going on in the market. And then tying that all back to a campaign and tying all of that back to a brand that's actually doing this, or in some instances a CSP or an aggregator that's buried somewhere deep, in the hops. Having all the data at vetting helps you get back to the who is doing this. And yes, Aegis has been vetting companies since premium SMS was huge back in 2007 in the US market at massive scale. And then more recently, partnering with the campaign registry and NetNumber, we've created a massive scalable process where we've seen as many as 42,000 companies in a single day come through the platform, automatically verified of who they are with behavioral background checks on many of those. And then the ability to tie the sending number to the campaign, to the brand, enables us to then identify fraudulent behavior in the market and trace it back, as I said, to the brand.
So you mentioned tracing it back to the brand, and let's talk about monitoring as a form of feedback and use that as a Trojan horse to talk about feedback as general, as a topic. And this is for everyone who wants to jump in. Like, between this conversation about multi-channel, omnichannel, everywhere, all the time, what does feedback mean when I feel we're converging towards messaging and voice and over-the-top kind of communications kind of becoming one conversation? How does feedback look in that world?
So from Proofpoint's point of view, feedback is incredibly important, right? Because it gives you that indication as to how the ecosystem is behaving as a whole, right? You start tying that in with intelligence data from the platforms internally, whether it be within the MNO, within the sender, wherever it may be, intercarrier, wherever, and being able to tie all that information together gives you a very rich view of of what's actually going on in the ecosystem, and then you can treat that accordingly, whether it's promoting good behavior or whether it's penalizing for bad behavior. Kind of to the vetting, and there are a lot of different things that were said within the last 3 people. But when it comes to vetting, it comes to compliance, right? Being able to for operators to be able to ensure that the communication coming into their network abides by their compliance, right? From a sender point of view, making sure that the content that they're sending out into the ecosystem also fits with the compliance of the MNOs and what have you. And Simeon and I, it's kind of our responsibility to kind of help both sides of that, to actually ensure that that we promote the good behavior, but we also penalize the bad behavior, and make sure that everybody understands that the appropriate elements within the ecosystem understand that they're being penalized or promoted.
Speaking about, let's I was told double-click is an overused stereotypical use case. I'm going to use it anyway because it works. Let's click down a little bit on that one, and just talk about both of your roles. What are you seeing in terms of feedback, things that have changed, I would say, in the last 12 months, and things are like, oh, wow, I didn't see this as a new problem or a new challenge. Speaking from a perspective of the business or the brand. Like a new content, new use cases?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of start from a new content, new use case, new. One of my, Mike Redding's actually going to speak to this a little bit later, but it's not something that all of a sudden comes about. I mean, we see new content, new attacks, minute to minute in some use cases. Just the tactics that they use from fraudulent behavior changes, as quick as you can blink an eye. As soon as you figure out a way to stop it, they've already, within 30, 60, 90 seconds, have already devised a way to get around what you just put into place. So when it comes to, we had conversations about AI and things of that earlier today. That really, there's nothing really that amazes me anymore when it comes to abuse, because there's always going to be the next way. And that's where feedback is actually critical, is because it gives you that indicator, right? Instead of, Simeon and I work for companies that have a finite number of people. But when you talk about MNOs, they have, and in terms of people who identify stuff that is malicious, there's millions of people out there. And it's a force multiplier for us to do our job.
Yeah, and so some of what we're seeing is, in an effort to stay in front of that, right? Everyone collectively in this room, on this stage, we're constantly evolving our best practices.
Yep.
Because as many bad actors as there are, there's a smaller amount of good actors, realistically. Like, if we're thinking about this room versus entire countries full of sort of hackers and bad actors, right? And so we're trying to stay ahead of that. Best practices evolve very rapidly. And so that's one of, I'm not trying to be the dead horse on stage, but the continuous education of the piece of what is best practice today may not be best practice tomorrow, may not be best practice next week.
In 10 minutes.
Exactly. No, it's true. And then I go back to the initial issue of cascading then those best practices downstream. We were actually meeting last night talking about how do we create more sort of macro level consistent error codes for 10DLC. Now that's down into the weeds of the tactical implementation of how we would do this, but it's a very valid conversation because it just addresses the concept of how are we actually creating the feedback loop that's actionable at each step along the chain. And it's tough. It's sort of like there's too much detail. You don't want to over-rotate. Like, at the end of the day, we all have to run businesses. But then there's also, at what level is that appropriate amount of information necessary for everyone's business, sort of for the continuity of the channel and sort of the integrity of the channel to cascade down through. And so that's kind of where that feedback loop becomes important, and maybe things like the 10DLC Working Council are very valid.
I think
one critical thing when it comes to that feedback loop, is you're walking that fine line of how much do you share and with whom do you share it with?
Right.
Because more than happy to share things with bandwidth, because we know that they're going to act on it appropriately. But there's some out there that you may not want to share things with because you know that they're going to utilize that information, that intelligence, to then change up the mechanism in which they're.
Yeah.
Speaking of sharing, I'll use this as a very esoteric, non-controversial example. 7726, 7727, sharing of data. First, somebody has to explain it to the room because I've heard 5 different definitions of that, what it means, and then how good are we as an ecosystem sharing that data?
Yeah, so I mean, on that point, I mean, this is really, I think, the crux of when we talk about feedback.
Yeah.
How do people feedback? Because really, the first way is just reply to the text, goes back to the sender. But frankly, that's a channel that really only the sender and the recipient can see. So yeah, what happened is that we had this ecosystem of customer education, which is to say, forward a message on to a shortcode, SPAM, which is 7726. It was a very manual system, but at least it now gave a feedback mechanism to an external point rather than just source or originator to be able to look at this. And then folks like Mike and ourselves companies were able to take that data and go, right, we can now assess that and potentially enforce. So I would say one of the key changes that we're seeing right now in the ecosystem is that a third party in the whole play of this is the handset vendors, the OS providers, because they are now making it easier for folks to provide feedback. So, one single button saying, as an end user, I've got something I've received, I do not want this. So it pops up as like a report spam or something like that. Report junk.
Yeah.
So you can hit that button and it automatically creates a really nice descriptive statement of what it is, who sent it, when it came from, and a whole set of other additional metadata.
And now, all of the content.
As, of course, the content. So the key question now is who gets to receive that data? And I think, this partly now becomes the challenge that there's a technical aspect. We can absolutely ensure anyone can get that, and particularly with the knowledge now of that full relationship chain between brand, sending number, sending CSP, terminating operator, end recipient, you've got everybody in the link there. But the real question is, what's the legal permission and the regulatory supportive framework to facilitate that flow of information? So that's the first aspect I would say is illegal. The second aspect is, when a user hits report junk, are they actually saying it is junk? Or are they saying, I didn't want to receive this? Or are they saying, I'm now opting out? Or are they just saying, I've read it, get it rid of me? So
I don't like my boyfriend or girlfriend anymore, so I'm going to report this message.
What we see a lot of, I don't like that my bank is telling me my account is overdrawn.
Exactly.
Report junk, right?
yeah, or stop sending me bill reminders.
Absolutely, and we're seeing, and Simeon hit a really critical element there, is technically, there's a lot that is possible, technically. Realistically, that's the easy part. To some of the conversation that Ian just had a little bit ago, it's more around the regulatory and the legal, right, in terms of what is capable. Technically, things are simple, right? There's APIs, there's mechanisms for all of this to be done in a very real-time manner. It's the legalities, and legalities from contract relationship perspective, legalities from regulatory, privacy, and even from a morality type point of view as well. Those are the big challenges in the ecosystem, especially when it comes to sharing, et cetera.
So, it's interesting because 7727 is really pretty much a U.S. term or maybe a North American term.
Yeah, I really wish that would
Right. So we're trying to kill that because what it really is these the ability to send from your device and just swipe right and report it as junk. The carriers are sending that to a short code 7727. But in Europe, that's completely unknown because it's being done differently.
And to be fair, John, it's not always 7727.
That's what I'm saying. So it's really report junk. But so interestingly, in the U.S. market, we are sharing, we're a first point of the network to collect 7727 report junk Apple data, and we immediately pass it to both firewall companies here on the stage so that they can tune their firewalls and block as necessary. But at the same time, we're structuring it into data structures and running analysis on every single message. And so the concept here is that a consumer is giving consent by reporting junk to their mobile operator that this is something I want you to investigate. And so what's happening is we are now reading every single message that comes through to see if it's harmful. And if it is harmful, we are doing a deep dive to try and figure out, can we trace it back to a registration? Can we trace it back to a specific brand? What information is in the message? What's the call to action? What labels of URLs or phone numbers? Is there anything in there that we can use to go investigate deeper? Or because we see the sending number, can we tie that back to the registries and then tie it to the brand? But what we're also doing for the mobile operators is we are able to tell the regulators that every customer complaint that comes in is being read, and those that are harmful are being investigated. So they're taking action on their consumers' complaints. Now, a couple of different things I wanted to mention. On a broader scale, all of these compliance services are for mobile operator channels. And in order to stay competitive, we have to keep the costs down. And so the objective here is to do all of these vettings and onboardings and investigations and deep dives and firewalling at a cost that keeps this industry competitive. And so that's really the big trick. Also using automation so that it's less drag on the people that want to use the channel. You need some friction because you want to stop bad actors, but minimize that to what it needs to be and keep the costs low. And that way we keep this business thriving. So anyway.
And this is where we've actually been leaning in with some of our, to your point, as the volume and velocity of sort of the compliance burden escalates, the overhead for that also escalates. And so you were actually talking about just staying ahead of the fraud curve with sort of AI. This is where we've actually been leaning into sort of machine learning. I would say more machine learning. I think AI is a bit overused of a term, but more of the machine learning element to help reduce the overall sort of people capital expenditure of doing this so that you can utilize your people for more of the high touch sort of involved analysis and then utilize the machine learning to sort of stay on top of like the well-established best practices while using the people to kind of stay ahead of actually the more sort of the less fine-tuned, the more nuanced, more emerging sort of elements of the feedback loop. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Sorry. The natural language processing sentiment analysis when reading these messages is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, in the US market, we see millions of these messages every day and have to read every one of them.
Yeah.
And the reality is tools are very available today. I mean, this is not, self-generative AI. This is,
Right.
intro AI, but it is usable today effectively.
The other context I just want to say, I think that machine learning brings, particularly with the large language modeling, is language independence, and that really can't be understated.
Yeah.
The fact that customers want to communicate in their language of choice. I mean, it's not just English, French, Spanish. People with the spectrum that we have. We commonly see about 45 to 50 languages active in networks, just given the spread of people. And language modeling gives us the ability to abstract the actual language and get back to the context, the sentiment, the intent, and then apply the human intelligence on top of that. So I think that is probably a big transformative stage that we've seen occur in the last couple of years.
So what I would add is betting at scale, fully automated, which we're doing today for 10DLC in the US market, also needs to be language capable, because we're getting companies from 160 countries and they're coming in different languages, and we have to be able to verify their identity and do a background check for behavioral. And so yes, more and more today, everything we do has to be, not dependent on single language capabilities.
With regards to language, I mean, Proofpoint or CloudMark has been language agnostic with our content content filter for, I think we were probably one of the first to do, if you will, machine learning from back in the day, and tying that all back with feedback, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, it absolutely, and I really think that it does come back to compliance, right? Making sure that, you know, John vets them out and makes sure that the company does what they do. There's some form of a registry, something where you can actually tie a brand to a phone number, a sender to a phone number, you know, all of these things. Making sure that the content that they're declaring that they're sending is actually the content they're sending, right? The sentiment that goes along with it. That way you can actually take the more so legitimate stuff. We won't, you know, there's always the people that don't comply with the opt-out and things of that sort, but we'll call that more legitimate and kind of reduce the noise by getting that out of the way, and then being able to focus on, you know, the P2P type stuff, things that are coming over P2P channels, where you can focus on the abuse and focus on, you know, really tying back to sentiment and you know, impersonation. There was a spoofing conversation, you know, earlier. In the SMS or MMS world, spoofing's not, in North America, not necessarily a huge issue when it comes to messaging. However, nobody has to spoof a number because impersonation is so easy to do, because you have financial institutions out there that are registering 10,000 numbers because they think it's a brilliant idea to have a local number for each one of their branches to message their clients. Nobody knows what that 10-digit number is, and they've gotten away from doing the short code so that, you know, so that the vetting that's been done in the past is no longer possible, because it's a challenge. It's you know, and they want to give, you know, the brands want to give that personalization. So impersonation is fraught. I mean, there's tons of it out there, and it's not that it's coming from bandwidth. We're seeing tons of it originating within the operators. So that in and of itself is one of the big things that I think is really important. Is the feedback mechanism needs to, again, kind of going back to promote well behavior, but weeding out some of that noise, if you will, that is causing the true issues in today's messaging.
You brought up another great point in terms of firewalling and market monitoring. Having a registry, knowing the brand that's tied to that sending number or that sending short code, those brands can be used to actually, in the firewall, look at the message, make sure that that brand is with that phone number. If the brand's changed, then somebody's changed that campaign without approval, for example. And so having that information both in the firewall and the market monitoring services to tie a brand to a campaign, to a phone number, really helps you ensure that what was registered is what is running.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that in real time or near real time.
Yes, exactly.
Is critical.
That's why I say the firewalls
Because-
are near
yeah.
real time.
But I think,
market-
John, the key thing, and going back to your earlier question, TJ, of what's happening in the future, I think an interesting trend is as we start to bring in additional bearers, additional protocols like RCS that all come to the same inbox but have very different control capabilities. You know, as soon as you start implementing end-to-end encryption, the players who have the ability to do some enforcement in that start to change.
Which brings me to my question about RCS. So we're running short of time. So I want to plug for the RCS OTT panel that's going to happen later this afternoon. I'll start with the filter vendors. What excites you about RCS and OTT and nothing? So the opposite of that question was, the second part was, what worries you about RCS?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you've seen scale, everything. Well, I'll ask the filter vendors first.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly today, we've been seeing attacks on RCS for about 8 years. You know, it is not a clean channel. I can guarantee that right now.
It's not.
And not just we're seeing spam attacks, we're seeing it used for extensive grey routing as well. So the whole concept of it being a nice closed control ecosystem, and you've got good separation between P2P and A2P, No, that is not present there today. And in fact, the controls that have been attempted to implement to prevent that have been overcome in, back to your earlier point, Mike, seconds, literally. It is actually very worrisome the more we talk about end-to-end encryption. That removes certain folks' ability to do certain types of control, to detect campaign drift, etc. So the future is going to be very interesting.
Yes.
So one thing real quick, so Google has basically in many countries said the carrier's name will be on that message with the tick that says verified by this mobile operator. So the vetting and verification of the logo, the banner, the background screens, if you're doing chatbots, becomes absolutely critical, and you need to do it at scale and you need to do it at low cost, but making sure they have rights to use that logo is critical. And that's really the biggest thing that the mobile operators need to face, because you will be verifying. You're saying you've verified this to your own customers.
And we've seen several times where that logo, you can create another logo that looks almost the exact same thing, and you can actually verify that logo and certify that logo, and it's your logo, and you can impersonate
Absolutely.
anybody
That's why we're creating
you want
thumbprint
to.
signatures of that logo, and they're going to be, in the networks, and they're going to be able to run comparisons. But anyway, yeah.
So from our point of view, when it comes to the
Well, Eddie, you'll have your chance. we will.
Come on up, Eddie.
Someone's not doing their job.
Yeah.
Period.
And stay tuned for the RTT or
That
RCS.
means we're over.
We're over. Caitlin, bring us home.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about it. It feels intuitive, but I think that there's 3 steps. So there's barrier to entry. We all have to have a barrier to entry, whether that's your fraud mitigation team, like what is the firewall that you're putting up. There's the continuous monitoring piece of it. There's different ways that sort of orients itself based on where you are in the network. That also is paired with continuous education, again, depending on where you sit in the network. And then there's the 3rd step, which we actually didn't talk a lot about, but it's sort of the consequences. It's the offboarding. It's the dismantling of campaigns. It's sort of the firing of customers, which is really, really tough. It's sort of those hard conversations you're having with your customers, downstream. And it's really that 3-pronged approach, and then also realizing that wherever you sit in the chain, your information that you're cascading down through the chain, it starts to get fuzzy. It's quite literally a game of telephone. And so it becomes less and less visible as you get down the chain. So understanding that and just like collectively maintaining the integrity as much as possible through these conversations.
well said.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, panel. We're ready for coffee break, our first coffee break. And one question? All right. All right. Do we have one question? It's not that question. Not Eddie's question.
Okay, he had his question.
Is it a question or is it a comment?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
This is more of a statement.
Of course it is.
Of course it is,
This
Eddie.
is a load of horse shit. Because we know exactly who the bad actors are. We know exactly where the traffic is coming from. And if you tell me not, you're talking to the wrong fucking person. Because if you want to stop this, you can stop this tomorrow by the punishment needs to be swift and severe. You were right. You were the first person to fingerprint messages. I remember when you guys launched. We know the bad actors. The stuff that's coming over 10-digit, block the main aggregator, and I guarantee it would stop until you care about the customer more than the revenue. And I'm talking about the customer, me or Steve or whoever. It will stop, and you don't. So all this money that's being spent, and I worked with John, and I worked with iConnective to get brand verification at my time at LivePerson and RCS and splitting the network up between P2P. And we always said there would be a P2P issue because it's now all IP messaging. But if you want to stop SMS spam, you could do it tomorrow, but nobody will, because nobody is willing to take the stand to say, this company who gives me $10 million a year is sending tremendous amount of artificially inflated traffic and spam, I'm turning them off. So until you're willing to do that, this will continue, and you'll all make a lot of money with your firewalls and all that stuff, but it will keep continuing, and people will keep getting upset. And I said this 2 years ago, I said this 3 years ago. We know exactly where this traffic is coming from. You could turn it
Sure
off
we do.
tomorrow.
And it's not all from the CSPs. It's not all from.
No, it's not.
And
It's
and
from some
and
big aggregators.
it's coming from network operators as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's a network operator problem. They should fix that. They could fix that if they wanted to, too.
Well, this is the kind of quality, candid conversations we've been having all day, so like starting from the morning. And I know I'm just looking forward to, I'm going to take four minutes away from Caitlin's panel, just because you stole time from coffee. But let's break up for coffee, all right? Thank you, everyone. Thank you.